Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. In this video is just a short comment on something that I hear all the time about runes, which is that they are designed to be carved, and that is why they consist of just straight lines. But I am here to tell you that they consist of just straight lines on Instagram, not on the 1,000 and 2,000-year-old inscriptions that we actually find in historical languages. So, like with many things in the ancient and medieval worlds as understood today, most enthusiasts are seeing runes much more often on, what's it call them, influencers pages, I guess, on Instagram or TikTok or whatever the next big thing is. And so for the most part, what those people are using are Unicode versions of runes. And the Unicode, the typable versions of runes, are very angular. They are, I think, all straight lines. I don't think there's any curves in the Elder Futhark or Younger Futhark version. However, I think that that is kind of an unfortunate aesthetic choice on the part of the people who programmed these, but it's an understandable one because for a long, long time, people talking about runes, and I might be included, have been inclined to say, well, this is an alphabet designed for carving, and that's why it consists of just straight lines. But it really, really doesn't consist of just straight lines. If we look at the very earliest inscription in runes that is known as of the last couple years, the one from Svingarud, we see this name Iðiberg, or something to that effect, probably a woman's name. And you might notice it's not really, really that straight. This was an example chosen kind of at random, although I wanted to have one that was really old, and that one, I just had pretty quick access to a picture of it. Look at one that's kind of from the middle of the runic writing period, the Ruk runestone, right? The longest known inscription on stone and runes. This is not particularly straight. I mean, look, here we've got Alkarfim Rath is how I'd read that out, just to use our transcriptions, our transliterations. I mean, look at that K, right? That's very curved. That F is very curved. The R is very curved. The thorn is particularly curved. Even though they're putting this into stone, and those curves are probably harder to do. I don't know. I've never actually carved anything other than, messing with a little bit of whittling or something. That's very different, I think. I think that it must be harder to do these curved lines. And I think that what that says is that their mental picture of these letters is not just these orthogonal straight lines at all. Like the Greeks and Romans, and I am one of these people who is apparently a minority of a minority in thinking about runic origins as not being from the Roman alphabet, but also not being from way back in the Phoenicians. That's just so absurdly early, and I don't understand what the cultural context was supposed to have been, etc., etc. But I think that the runic alphabet is derived, and I have a bunch of videos about this, from probably a Celtic people's adaptation of a regional Greek alphabet. You can actually construct a pretty good argument for this. Again, I have whole videos about it, so go look at that if you're interested in that question. But I think that just like the Greeks and the Romans, even though they're carving in stone a lot, because Greeks and Romans do too, their ideal picture of the letters has some curves. Greeks and Romans are carving all the time, and they don't resort to just straight lines. So why do people in Northern Europe need to resort to just straight lines? Well, they don't. Let me just interrupt this video for a minute to tell you about my friends and partners at grimfrost.com. These guys have been in the business for a really long time, and they really care about getting the history right. They even get runes right, and I've done some of the runes for some of their products. If you're interested in historically authentic Viking Age products, that is the place you want to go. It's also a good place to get my books, especially if you live in Europe. I also want to update you on my books, my Wanderer's Journal, a blank journal with quotes from Havamal rendered in Younger Futhark by me, as well as in my Cowboy Havamal translation, is available for pre-order and should ship in North America by mid-April. And the second enhanced edition of my Poetic Edda translation will be available by the end of this year. It includes new poems not included in the first edition and thoroughly revised older poems. Poems are already there, and a thoroughly revised introduction, and a lot more fantastic looking art. And then look at the Codex Runicus, right? Here we see, what is this, page 8R, Der Bonde och Havir. This is written, right? This is actually done with ink, but also not going for straight angular lines. Or look at, let's flip all the way back to Elderfrith, the Ashbury stone. This is my own picture, just like the Rook stone was. There's the word runor. It's not all straight lines. So people are letting their, it's just like I feel people that say, I feel like I belong in an earlier time. And then you say, okay, well, what work of ancient or medieval literature influenced you to feel that way? And they say, oh, no, I don't read that stuff. That's boring, right? But some modern writer who comes from the same culture as I do and has some of the same frustrations or whatever, writes about this time and writes either fiction that appeals to me or writes essays, might be a generous word, that appeal to me. I don't know. I think that in a similar way, people who get really enthusiastic about runes don't actually care very much about what's written in runes often. And I'm not trying to cast aspersion on people who have enthusiasm about this. It's great to have enthusiasm about it. I mean, don't have as much enthusiasm about it as I did, because that resulted in me getting on a career path that doesn't pay well. But it's fine to have enthusiasm about the past. But I think that it's good to temper that enthusiasm for the past with an appreciation of what's actually from the past. And most runic inscriptions are relatively boring, right? Most of them are so-and-so carved this stone for so-and-so who died. There's not many that are, true mysteries, although the Runic runestone is one, and I have a good video with Professor Henrik Williams, one of the world's top runologists, where we looked at the Rook runestone together in person, and he offered his full interpretation. That was fascinating. So somebody on Instagram uses, just types runes and probably is just substituting them for Roman letters, right? Not even thinking about how to spell English in runes if you were thinking about it from the perspective of somebody who spoke Proto-Norse or Old Norse as their native language. And people are just more likely to see that. And that's part of what reinforces this notion that they're just straight lines. But on the ground, on actual runestones, they're not. I have looked in vain for a runestone. It may exist, but I've looked in vain for a runestone that has truly just straight lines, and I imagine that it would look about as crude relative to the nice finished runestones that we have as a Greek or Roman inscription that used just straight lines would look. You occasionally actually do sometimes find that in pretty archaic Greek, but early on people decided that a mix between straight lines and curved lines was more visually appealing. They're probably right, and we continue to think that today. The past is a different country, but it's not full of different people. Well, I appreciate those of you out there buying my books. Watch out for the second edition of the Poetic Edda translation. It will be revised and enhanced. I have revised the translations after 15 years in some cases of more contact with these poems, which I read all the time in the original, teach all the time in the original. So enhanced translations, some more translations, some poems that weren't in the original edition. A lot more art, which will be, I think, a really interesting feature. So watch out for that. There's also the Wanderer's Journal already available for pre-order. All right. Probably dug deep enough of a hole. For now, from stunningly beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.
He's gonna find a spot. Gorgeous. I scrambled up the side of a mountain.